Hello again, welcome back to another Buster Keaton video. This time I'm going to talk about film, not film. This is a film written by Samuel Beckett. The film part of it, not film, is the documentary about the making of the film. It was made years later for this disc. So Samuel Beckett wrote this film for his publisher. Because the idea was we were going to do 3 films written by top authors, and it would be directed, and it'd show the authors' attempt to working within film. Although they only shot one of them, it was made by Grove Press, who were the people who published Beckett, they published William Burroughs, published a lot of the top 50s authors. And so this them trying to expand into film. Didn't work, and they just chugged it up to didn't work, and that was it. But the short was released. The short was like 20 minutes long. It was called Film, and it starred Buster Keaton. And Beckett didn't direct it. Beckett was on the set though, and he chose a director who collaborated with him, and he was the guy who had the whole idea of what the film should be. Now they had a top class cinematographer, Boris Kaufman, who had done a lot of Lila Kazan films, and he'd done a lot of films in Europe as well, so he was a top level cameraman. The Buster Keaton, who was a top level star in the 20s, and who was still getting hired for different jobs as an actor now, so he was still like available to be hired. So even though he was towards the end of his career and he was pretty old at this point, and did Samuel Beckett writing it, so it should have been a big prestige film, even though it was only a short. And it was made, and it had a lot of production problems, which I'll get to. And it was premiered, and no one got it. It was just like, it was thought it was a bore. It was thought it was really tedious. It was thought it was a failure. After all the hype about it, it just never delivered for people, and everyone moved on. It helped Buster Keaton get some acclaim again near the end of his life, so it helped him a little bit. But it was just pretty much thought of as a failure, and even Beckett didn't see it as a success. And Beckett moved back onto his works in theatre, and whenever his plays were filmed after this, it was for television. Much more basic, much more theatrical, much more spare, less ambitious, less using studio sets and making it artificial rather than try to deal with the real world. So this film is very complicated, but it's very confusing as well, because certain scenes meant to explain things that were cut out. So you're watching the film, you're interpreting the film, but you're not. I never interpreted the film to mean what the makers interpreted it to mean. Specifically because there's a scene cut out at the beginning they couldn't shoot because of the problems with the camera. They couldn't afford to go back and shoot it. They explained the plot and explained like this guy was getting watched by somebody, and there was 2 personas. So the plot had 2 figures, O and E. One was watching another, and the figure we're watching is always his back to us. There's no sound. There's no nothing, and the figure's played by Buster Keaton, who's an old man, and he's trying to avoid the gaze of this other figure. Now, because they didn't establish the other figure even existed, you just thought he was being paranoid and he hated everybody. That's what I thought. I never thought there was a conceptual thing they were trying to get across. I just thought it was about paranoia. And that's where the film works better, because we actually find out there's one guy which hates the other guy. It sounds a bit silly, and it never really seems to explore it in an interesting way. But if it's just about paranoia generally, the film really works, because Boris Kaufman's cinematography is great, and Keaton is so expressive. Even if you can't see his face, just the body language is so depressed and so graceful and so weird that it suggests a sadness of the world. And you see him trying to get to this location, which I assumed was his home, which was hiding out. And apparently it wasn't meant to be that, but it was never explained. And you just see him trying to cover and not block off any way to be seen. as if it's a man going mad and a man who can't face the world and who's slowly going crazy. And it lasts for 20 minutes, this guy slowly going crazy. Fears he's getting watched by somebody. It feels like a nuclear wasteland. It feels like the world has gone to hell. And the film, I really enjoyed the film. It really was wonderful, but it was wonderful in ways that I don't think it was intended to be wonderful. Like, I think Beckett was interested in the conceptual thing, and he didn't appreciate at the time what Boris Kaufman was doing with the visuals and what Buster Keaton was doing. And I don't think they were taken into his inner circle as much as they might have liked. Like, Buster Keaton admitted he didn't understand the script. And I think because he wasn't really involved in the conception, he just treated it like a job and just did what he could. And which is weird because the two people who seem to be at odds with it, the two people who come across best in it, which is Kaufman and Keaton. The actual idea, whenever they even explain it in not film, the documentary, still feels a bit odd. It still feels like it hasn't been worked out properly. Like it wasn't. The concept of it never really was locked down in a way that would have been satisfying for anybody. But it was the starting point. And I think even when even Beckett must have realised at a certain point, because when he said you don't need the start, that they couldn't have to refilm, when he said don't bother, I think he must have realised that it wasn't clear enough anyway. That what was there was fine for what it was. Because what it is about paranoia and about aging in a society that doesn't care, and it's all about your own paranoia, your own sanity. Being left alone and feeling everyone's looking at you, and it was what it is. It has this mood piece about a guy slowly going mad, and the finale is the person he has to try and face is himself. The person who's fallen is him, which is the idea of the piece. But the idea of the piece is more intellectual, is like the objective and the subjective. And it never really comes across in what they're doing. But the film is wonderful, it's worth seeing. They reshot it like 15, 20 years later. Try to follow the script more. I watched a few minutes of this one, it didn't work. It just wasn't interesting. Plus you didn't have Keaton there, you didn't have the black and white cinematography, the two things that it really made it work. So I never bothered after that. But the film is great. Not film is also really interesting. It starts off a bit pretentious because the guy's directing it wants to show off he's an intellectual, even though he's just doing a film about a film. And then once you get into the actual idea of who Beckett was, how he was paranoid, how he didn't like being photographed or recorded, and how basically the film was kind of about him, even though we'd probably never admit it was about him. He was trying to intellectualise something that was about his traumas. It becomes about the process, about them trying to get different people who said no, but how the director was never quite sure of the concept and felt it was brought in too late to try and work it out, which caused problems. But how Kaufman never quite worked it out, he was always asking Beckett to explain it to him. They couldn't work out what he was on about, and then no one could ever work it out. But everybody who got on their jobs understood it, and they didn't understand it intellectually, but understood it emotionally, and that's the way it worked. I think Beckett never worked out that's what film was. It wasn't about the intellectual distance; it was about the emotional feeling you got, which is something Kaufman and Keaton seemed to understand instinctively. Like, this is what it's really about. This stuff you're talking about doesn't matter. It's good backdrop, it's good to kind of focus stuff, but it's not what cinema's about. Because I think Beckett's conception of cinema was more distance. And I think Beckett even said later on that the film kind of worked in ways he wasn't planning for, and didn't work in the ways he was planning for. It's like even he got it once he'd seen the film together, was like the stuff he was focused on didn't work, but the stuff everyone else was doing worked, because they knew what they were doing, they understood the medium. And the whole thing is about how Keaton just was a bit distant from it all. He showed up and did his work, and even though they shot it in the summer and it was very warm, and he was old, and he still did all the jobs perfectly, even though he didn't understand the story because he was getting paid. But he tried putting a lot of grace notes that a lot of time they didn't want. But he was so good in the film because just his back, the way he could move, even though you could never see his face. It's just wonderful in the film because one of the things about the film is because there's no sound, and you always try to look around the corner and see Beacon's face because you never can wait to see his face. That's the thing you want to see for the film, and that's the big conceptual thing of the film. Like, he's a man distant from himself, and that's what's because it's Keaton. But the film shows you what it's about, and not film, I mean, shows you what it's about, what happened. How Keaton really wasn't that invested, but he was a professional. But James Caan, who's one of the other actors, said they never asked him for his expertise. He could have told him lots of tricks that would have made their lives a lot easier, but they never asked. So, and then Kaufman knew a lot of tricks as well, so he managed to keep it going and use his expertise to keep it working. But how Beckett was just trying to control and trying to get that kind of intellectual perfection that couldn't exist. Like, he wasn't really aware of collaborating. Like, in theatre people followed his orders and they would get everything perfect. In film it was more collaboration. He never quite got that, he never quite found a way around that. But the film is like 2 hours long, and well, not film is 2 hours long. I mean, it goes into a lot of detail about Keaton, about Beckett, about the publishers, and about how other actors worked for Beckett as well. And it is a look at what happened to Keaton afterwards, what happened to Beckett afterwards. It's a really nice film. Not film's really well put together. It's tried to be more than it is though. I mean, that's the big problem with it is, every so often the pretensions come through and you're thinking, just give it a rest, will you? It is wonderful though, and I'd highly recommend buying this, film not film. It's really worth your time, because even if you don't like film, it's your last chance to see Buster Keaton in a starring role, and there's a terrific documentary about it as well. So it is really worth your time to watch it. So that's me about film not film. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back soon with some other stuff. Right, bye for now.